extinction in the Victorian era for their feathers, because the Victorians took a fancy to their feathers, but they were actually one of the two birds, along with the grey-crested grebe, that started the RSPB back in the Victorian era. And of course, thanks to the efforts of the RSPB, these birds are starting to make a recovery and coming back to the rest of Britain. And of course, this was their range in 1988 to 1991. Of course, now today, while they're still mainly concentrated in Scotland, they're slowly coming back to the rest of England and even Wales. So fingers crossed we could have the Osprey back. Now, the next animal I'm going to show you all is our most common bird of prey. It is the buzzard. Now, buzzards are Britain's most common bird of prey. And when I say the most common, I mean they are widespread across all of the British Isles. I mean, they may not be as big as the golden eagle or the white-tailed eagle. I mean, even so, they are one of our most magnificent birds of prey. But they're large for a British bird, with a wingspan just over a metre long, a short head and neck, and small tail, and the wings are always held upwards in a shallow V shape, and they have a loud ringing call that shows that they're around on the habitat they live in. And of course, in Scotland, it's not uncommon for a buzzard to be mistaken for a golden eagle, and I'm going to have to ask all of my Scottish friends to forgive me for this next bit. It's known by most Highlanders as the tourist's eagle. I swore I would not do that again, but I had to. Anyway, buzzards are found in a wide range of habitats. I mean, one of the reasons why they've been able to spread so successfully across Britain is down to their ability to adapt to different habitats they live in hilly countryside, along woodlands, and even rocky cliff habitats, and even along urban areas. Of course, another reason why they've adapted so well and managed to spread across Britain is down to their diet. Buzzards do eat small mammals, including other birds that are either young or injured, and the buzzard will also go for carrion, dead meat, if it's fairly fresh, but they will also eat frogs, toads, lizards, large insects and worms, but their favourite food of all are rabbits, and quite often the buzzard will scan the air from the air or a perch, and it will, when it spots a rabbit, it will drop down and either pin the prey to the ground with its talons or pursue it in a low-level chase. And of course, like all birds of prey, talons are what it uses to kill its prey, because the buzzard's beak isn't particularly large or strong like a golden eagle's. And of course, buzzards in early March will perform a ritual near their nest where a male and a female will almost synchronisingly dive and fly together. And of course, that's quite often how they mate. Buzzards are also loyal mates, bonding for life. So when one of the pair dies, the other will often wait a year before finding a new mate. Because buzzards, once they've established their breeding bonds, they will usually build a nest. Of course, the outer layer is usually composed of leaves and sticks, while the inner layer can be made of heather, grass, and even wool. Of course, they usually nest in a tree or along along a crag on a cliff. And the pair will usually have 3 chicks. And of course, quite often when the chicks are small, prey can be brought into the nest and left and fed to them piece by piece. But as they get bigger, whole rabbits can be brought into the nest and left for the buzzards to tear at themselves. And like all birds of prey, the buzzard can leave its breeding territory to find food, and can also share hunting grounds with others of its kind. However, roaming buzzards can run into trouble with other birds, like one here is being harassed by a couple of crows. And that happens because if a buzzard is seen around or too close to a the crow nesting sites, the whole of them will all join forces and dive up on the buzzard to drive it away. In fact, smaller birds joining forces to drive off larger predatory birds is quite common behaviour. The practice is known as mobbing. Of course, it can be quite effective, but I have heard that quite often a buzzard or even an eagle, if a crow does it too often, the buzzard or eagle will quite often flip onto its back and just grab the crow in mid-air. I mean, that's what happens if they try anything like that. Although the past misfortunes of buzzard, which nearly led to its extinction, dwindled their numbers, they have, however, made a massive recovery and become the most widespread bird of prey in Britain. And of course, people of Britain can now see it for what it really is, a truly magnificent bird of prey. Of course, here is their range. Now, the next film I'm going to show you is Starlings. Now, Starlings often divide opinion because not everyone is fond of their boisterous, noisy behaviour. Because quite often when Starlings are together, they can quite often be seen in squawking and fighting with each other. Of course, when I was growing up, starlings were always one of my favourite garden birds that I used to love watching on the bird feeders in my mum's garden just out the window of my kitchen. Of course, also, unfortunately, like many other birds, starling numbers have dropped in rural areas due to changes in farming practices, which has driven them more and more into urban areas. And of course, just like their human neighbours, large flocks of city-dwelling starlings can be noisy and messy, but they are an incredible sight as they fill the skies in vast flocks as they depart from or return to their roosting sites. And believe it or not, there's actually in the Somerset Levels in southern England, there's congregations of these starlings. Of course, when they flock together like this, it's called a murmuration, where they basically all band together to either depart from or return to a roosting site, and that can make it very difficult for a predator to catch one. And of course, to many people, starling's plumage may look scrappy and dull, but a closer look at one in summer reveals that they have a very peaceful plumage with purple and green in it and a bright yellow beak. But in winter, that fades to be replaced by dull white and buff white spots with black plumaging, and the yellow beak turns dark. However, recognising a juvenile starling is far more easy because it has none of its parents' spots or speckling or black plumage. In fact, they're more of a dull greyish brown with a darker area around each eye. However, once the youngsters begin to molt into their first adult plumage in autumn, they can appear a bit patchy with the lower section looking like adult plumage with the white spots, but still retaining the dull greyish brown plumage of the juveniles on the head, neck, and upper breast. Of course, starlings, they mostly feed on invertebrates like worms, beetles, spiders, all kinds of insects, but they will also, as well as worms, but they will also feed on fruit, and they also come to feeders to feed on seeds and peanuts. And of course, some British starlings, well, at least the adults, don't migrate, because what they do is, because the adults don't need to migrate, and quite often younger individuals will fly overseas, so the population's more spread out. Some even get as far as France or Belgium, while the remaining resident starlings are joined by other birds trying to get away from the Siberian winter of continental Europe. Of course, adult starlings don't need to travel very far because they don't really need to. Their ability to continue finding prey as well as find the scraps from humans allows them to get through the winter, while many other birds have just given up and flown south. Of course, as I mentioned earlier about starlings, well, to many people they're not very pleasant birds. As if you ever see starlings, they're usually in a squabbling group on a rooftop or in a garden, because they're very social birds, but their presence with each other sometimes results in frequent quarrelling. I personally think these are some of the most beautiful birds in Britain, and I've always had a bit of a soft spot for starlings, because I just think that they are gorgeous. And here is their range. Now, the next bird I'm going to show you is another of our most common birds of prey. It is the kestrel. Now, the kestrel is our second most common bird of prey, and also our second smallest falcon. How you tell them apart, male from female, is that this here is a female, and she's all brown, but this here is a male, and the males are the ones with the blue head and tail, and of course, a little bit like the merlin, although the merlin is a lot smaller than a kestrel. In fact, kestrel can probably grow to be about this kind of height, I'm guessing. But of course, as I said about them being one of our most common birds of prey, probably our second most common after the buzzard, of course. Kestrels will mate for life, and the females are always bigger than the males, as it is in birds of prey. And of course, they usually have a brood of about probably 3 or 5 chicks, and they will nest in a rocky crag on a cliff, or in a tree, or even occasionally they will go in a man-made nest box, which I think is absolutely incredible. And one of the reasons why I think they are some of the most amazing birds is because they are said to be the world's master of hovering. Quite often, whenever you see kestrels, usually alongside the motorway, they're always hovering in one place with their head held very, very still, while their wings are either beating down like this, or just making tiny micro adjustments, or not even just not appearing to move. And that's down to how they hunt, because like peregrine, they have two focal two focal little sensors at the back of their eyes, where we humans have only one. Of course,